Good morning and welcome to the Environmental Echo Podcast. I am Paul Boyce, CEO and President of PWGC Consulting, and your host today. We've got a really exciting topic, at least in my mind. We'll see what our listeners have to say about this or think about it. But we're going to be covering dewatering. What does that mean? Where is it applied? How does it fit into the environment? And what's it used for? What are some of the regulatory issues we have to address when we do these things for deep construction projects that may go below the water table? We've got two great guests today as well. We've got Kyle Allan, a project manager with Chesterfield Associates out in West Hampton Beach. They're a marine construction and engineering company. They were founded in 1968. They also have a base of operations in Westport Island, Maine, which to me, I didn't know that. That's interesting. Kyle, you've been with Chesterfield for 5 years, and you're also a resident of West Hampton Beach. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Paul.
Also joining us, we've got a repeat offender here today. We've got Regina Bykov from our office. She's a senior project manager at PWGC, and it would take me all morning to go through her areas of expertise, but certainly dewatering is one of them. She's involved in multiple water-related engineering disciplines, including, obviously, just said the dewatering, but the mining operations, and we can go on and on with this site stuff. And it's been a pleasure working with you for the last, oh my gosh, what's it been? Probably 13
Almost
years?
20 years.
Almost 20? Has it been that long?
It has.
Time has flown. Well, Regina, welcome back. All right. So with that, we're going to get right into our topic of construction dewatering. So Kyle, Regina, I touched on it briefly in the introduction, a little bit about what it is, but if you guys can dive a little more deeply into, what is it? When do we need it? Why do we need it? Just let me know. Kyle, what are your thoughts?
Dewatering is essentially just dropping whatever water level you're working with, whether it be groundwater or water in like a pond or any type of water like that, where you'll put it in a coffer dam and dewater for construction operations within that area. One that we're working on recently, or in the middle of working on now, is to drop the groundwater in an area of excavation so someone can have a larger basement and an entertainment center. So dropping the water table, dropping the water levels.
Regina, what are your thoughts on what dewatering is, what it means? Why is it important?
It's essentially just taking water out of the ground and moving it somewhere else so that you can lower the water table and facilitate construction.
Right.
I mean, we've worked at PWGC and obviously worked with Chesterfield on numerous projects. You just described one that we're doing out on the east end of the island. It's for a large residential construction. The homeowner wants a basement. They're building close to the shoreline down on the south shore of the island. What we have is, we call it a shallow water table, right? It's only a couple feet down till you hit water. And when these folks want to build something like this, we've got to physically remove that water to keep the work site dry. So once it gets dry, then what do you do? What's going on once we've dug out this hole? We've got the water out of the hole. What do you do then? How do you keep it dry?
Consistent pumping, and management of that dewatering system. So I guess just to get into it, what we do is drive steel sheeting more often than not in the area of the excavation where they want to do their work. So depending on where the water table is or how deep it is, you determine how long your steel sheeting is going to be. You drive them all in that perimeter, and then you'll set up essentially a bunch of straws, which we call well points, and then put them to a header that goes along the top of the steel sheeting as your plumbing. And then we'll use a large 8-inch well point pump, diesel powered, to suck all that water out. And then depending on what the system is, what the site is going to give us, we determine how we're going to get rid of that water, whether it be a large recharge basin or a filtration system set up with a bunch of different diffusion wells where we'll actually pump it back down into the aquifer. So we'll consistently be pumping that water for the duration of the construction to go on within that excavation area, which kind of goes outside of our realm. We can drive piles in there, which is part of our expertise. Once that's done, then they can come up and start with their foundation work, bring in concrete. And once they waterproof, then we're able to shut off the system, let the water table come up, and then we'll either remove the steel if possible, or in some cases we can just abandon it in place and cut it below grade. Yeah.
Wow. So Regina, that's the construction side. You and I get involved on the design side. Tell them how deep to drive the sheeting, how much water they've got to pump. Can you describe a little bit about the design process? What's involved, and how do you figure out how much water I have to pull out of the ground to keep this area dry while they need to lower, say, the water table 3, 4, 5 feet in some instances, or even more, over a large area? What's involved?
I think the first thing that we're looking for is the groundwater level. So a lot of times a contractor will have dropped a well, or will propose to drop a well, put a data logger in there and monitor the groundwater level over a certain period of time. But the longer period, the better. Once that's done, we can download that data and take a look at it. And usually we take the highest groundwater level, worst case scenario. And that's what we use as our groundwater level, or the level of the water that we need to drop down to a certain amount of feet. And that's based on the design, basement design or tank design or whatever construction that you're doing. And generally we like to make sure that that groundwater is dewatered about a foot or two below the bottom of the excavation. So once we determine that, we can either use hand calculations or groundwater modeling to input some parameters: groundwater level, hydraulic conductivity, porosity, a whole
key properties of the soil that we're trying to dewater, huh?
Exactly. And when that all gets plugged in, we run our calculations and we can determine the amount of water that we need to pull out of the ground. One of the things that helps is installing piles, and they act as almost a cutoff wall. And
so the sheeting that Kyle was talking about.
Yeah, yep. Steel sheeting. We can drive them down 20, 30, 40 feet. The deeper you drive them, the less water is going to come back into the excavation. And the easier it is the easier it will become to keep that water level down once you start dewatering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. People may not understand that the deeper we drive our cutoff walls, the less water we have to pump to keep it dry.
Yep.
But from a construction standpoint, you guys couldn't drive, maybe you could, but 100-foot sheeting would be either physically impractical or cost prohibitive, so there are limitations, correct?
Yep, absolutely. I think we have 40-foot sheets in the ground for the project that we're working on now. But the project that we worked on prior, in the same area, I think it was probably 2 years ago that we worked with you guys on, we only used 20-foot sheets.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, depending on where that site is, what the groundwater is doing, how far we are from the shoreline, all is determined on that.
I mean, so what do you think the limitations are? How deep could we drive sheeting if we didn't have limitations on it, how long it is to drag it down the road to get it to somebody's, site?
Yeah. Well, it could be pretty long. I mean, the logistics of getting it there would probably be the most difficult thing.
That'd be the,
but we have the ability to drive a 60-foot sheet, a 65-foot sheet if necessary.
Keep that in mind, Regina.
I'll keep that in mind.
Because as you guys have pointed out, once we take the water out of the ground, right, we got to do something with it. It's not just going to magically leave the site and go away, And what I've found is generally the toughest part of this is not getting it out of the ground. It's getting it back into the ground or getting rid of it once it's out.
Right.
What are some of the typical obstacles we face when, once the water's out of the ground?
Man, there's quite a few. I think the biggest obstacle right off the bat is just the site that you're dealing with. And how large it is. More often than not, especially where we do a lot of our work in these type of projects out east in the Hamptons, where people will buy a small piece of land and want to build a larger house on it. That kind of dwindles our options in regards to where we can put this water. In the past, we've been lucky enough to have a large site where we just dig a giant retention pond and put tarps on it. And it's nice sandy bottom. And we pump water directly into that. And then it can go right back into the water table from there. The next option is what you guys have designed here is the diffusion wells. So we put it through a filtration system and then back down into the aquifer. And then with that raises a whole different amount of issues with how much water they can accept, and with the water quality. How much iron is in
100%.
it. How the filters react with the amount of iron, and then at certain times of year, the algae that gets into it, and
Underlying formation.
yeah, exactly. The list goes on.
It's, again, very interesting. And my experience is it's a lot easier to get the water out of the ground than it is back into it.
Absolutely.
That's what people need to, I think, have a better understanding of. It's not, a one-to-one exchange at times. For whatever reason, it's always more difficult to get it to recharge as quickly as you're pulling it out. So oftentimes, if we've got a certain amount of screen to pull it out, we need a lot more screen to get it back in. Or as you pointed out, we need a great big recharge basin, that's going to take up, a half an acre or an acre of someone's property while we're building this. And that leads me to my next question here is, when we design these things, we build these things, what kind of permitting obstacles are in the way or regulatory issues that we're facing? Maybe, Regina, you could lead us in that discussion.
Generally in Region 1, Long Island, the DEC regulates water withdrawal. In this case, if you're using well points, then you need to get a Long Island well permit. So that's just a process of filling out some forms, EAF, a joint application form, Long Island well permit application with supplemental data for dewatering and a design. And then that gets submitted to the DEC. The DEC reviews it, generally has some comments, goes back and forth, and then eventually, hopefully, they would issue a permit. For most of my projects, most of my projects, we've had permits issued. So the DEC is the one that regulates that type of project.
What are the things that they look for typically?
So with dewatering, when you're doing like a dewatering in a residential area or an area that is densely populated, homes, businesses around there, I think they're primarily concerned with what you're doing, where you're going to put the water back in to the aquifer, and if that is going to affect neighboring basements, tops of slabs. So their review, I think, is focused. I mean, they're looking at a larger picture, but one of the main things that I think that they are looking at is whether or not you're going to raise the table so that you could flood out somebody's basement or somebody's house.
Gotcha.
So that can be a difficult thing to present to them, because what you have to do is you have to go take a look at the area, figure out what houses are kind of in the radius of influence of your pumping, and then figure out who has a basement, what their elevation is, and then present all of that information to the DEC. And that information is not always easily available.
Of course. Yeah. To know whether the neighbor has a theater in their basement.
Sometimes they don't want you coming in their house to find out what my basement elevation is. And part of the thing you should mention, Regina, is that 2-foot rule, right?
Yes.
So if we're within 2 feet already, that guy's top a slab of the neighbor, and we're going to be putting water back into the ground and maybe potentially raise that water table a little bit, we are not allowed to come within 2 feet of a neighboring slab.
Okay.
Right. And so if you're already within 2 feet, you can't even raise the water table at all. You have to demonstrate that you're not affecting it at all.
So let's say their slab is at elevation 3 and groundwater is at elevation 1, where that's it.
That's it. You can't, if we are dewatering and we drop it, the DEC is fine with that. But if where we're putting it back in starts to, as Regina said, has this influence, it creates a mound.
Yep.
If we come within, we raise it even a 100th of a foot, they're not going to allow it.
Right. And that's all done with the modeling, which is submitted to the DEC, which of course is theoretical, right? We don't know exactly what the ground is looking like.
You are correct. I mean, we do the best we can when we create these like 3D numerical groundwater models to estimate and analyze. But again, it is theoretical. And as you know, when you start digging in the ground, the geology can change oftentimes very rapidly from one area to another. And that can have significant effects on the way our model reacts. And when we design a model, it's based on average conditions for the area. That's the only way we can do it. We're not going to be out there identifying every single soil property of every single square foot of every single site. It's just it's impractical, and if not impossible.
Yeah, you'd still be out there just taking soil samples.
Oh my gosh!
And boring reports.
We're really relying heavily on like USGS documents.
That's right. And,
Right.
and oftentimes we don't even have the luxury of doing pumping tests to see how the aquifer is really responding until we go in and start the dewatering. So again, as you said, it's a lot of it is just theoretical analysis. But
Right.
the DEC is very open to that, or they have been, which we appreciate, and they're very understanding of it too. So they do have to sort of take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. And, in reality, if things are different, they make us put in monitoring wells, correct?
Correct.
So that way we watch the water levels. Once you guys start dewatering, we've got these wells out there where we're supposed to record water levels, I don't know, periodically, daily, or whatever it is, whatever the permit stipulates, to make sure the water table's not going up, or if it's going down, it is going down.
Right.
Right?
Yes. Yep. You have to take measurements, I think, every day in those permits.
Good stuff. So are there any other permitting issues or obstacles that, besides like the DEC's? Well, let me just backtrack. I know that specifically with the site we're working on together out in East Hampton, there are alternate places we can discharge water to, right?
Yes.
And it's even been
Potentially.
And it's been suggested, recommended to look at that by some agencies, and it could be a nearby surface water body.
Yep.
Right. But that also comes with its own set of issues. You guys care to share what those issues might be, or how are we, trying to face this challenge and maybe potentially get the opportunity to sort of use a surface water body as maybe an additional discharge point or a relief point when our wells need to be maintained?
So that's the easiest way to get rid of the dewatered water would be to go to a body of water, really. And you don't face the same challenges as trying to get them down into diffusion wells, whether or not the diffusion wells are going to operate or the aquifer is going to accept the water.
Yeah, it's just like we were saying, it's tougher to get it back in, but if there's like an infinite water body to discharge
you can just keep discharging. And unfortunately, or fortunately, that is normally regulated, I think, in a dewatering application by the DEC, but some towns also have their own requirements.
Yeah.
And so for this particular site in East Hampton, we need to get another approval from the town to be able to discharge water. And that we haven't had to do that in the past. We've been able to manage our water on site generally. Mm-hmm. But for this particular project, it is challenging. It's in a challenging location. It has the geology of the site is challenging. The groundwater itself.
It's almost like a peninsula too. You got water bodies on like two sides of where it's positioned. So it's, as I said, shallow water table doesn't begin to describe this.
Yeah, exactly.
So, so we are in the process for this particular site of trying to get approval to temporarily discharge if needed when the diffusion wells aren't operating as expected, or if we need to rehab the diffusion wells to the surface water.
Well, I mean, from my involvement, and I understand, one of the issues that we need to overcome with the surface water discharge is water quality. Right. Kyle, you want to let us know a little bit of what people are concerned about with when we discharge groundwater to a surface water body?
So I think with this case in particular, the DEC is used to having a dewatering project, whether it be a very small scale, like a cofferdam or something like that, where you're going to build a bridge abutment or a boat ramp or something, where you'll get a DEC dewatering permit. You put a 6-inch submersible in, you have that running 24/7. You put it through a sediment filter, whatever that be, whether it be a precast ring or a frac tank, and you pump it directly
to a creek or
outside
whatever
of
it
the
is.
steel sheeting that you're pumping from. So it's water out, water right back in, and there you go. This situation is much different because, like Regina had mentioned, the body of water is the responsibility of the town. And especially being such a high profile body of water out there, their concern is the condition of that body of water.
Yeah.
Whether the level of it, where that's going to be, how that's going to affect the quality of the water, whether the algae blooms, the shellfish that's in there, just to try and maintain the health of that pond. So what we're up against now is really the unknown. We're probably the first ones that have come to them with the possibility of dewatering into this body of water. So their biggest concerns are the levels, how high it's going to be, what will be affected if we pump that amount of water into it.
So you're talking about the water level within the pond is
Correct.
a concern.
Sorry, yes. And how that's going to be affected by pumping 650, 700 gallons per minute into it. And then the next one being the water quality.
Yeah.
So they took the water quality samples from the pond itself, and then of course the water quality from the frac tank that we're pumping into now,
or dewatering effluent, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And to see if they match up and how close they are, and how it would be affected if we were to be pumping that water with that water quality type into the pond. So, and Regina can probably speak more to it than I can. When we got into dewatering, it kind of happened organically because we were able to drive steel and drive piles and had to do
That's
coffer dams.
what I've always known you guys to be really good at.
Yeah. So what we're doing in the world of construction is, we've gotten bigger in scale and it's been great. But when it comes down to, I don't know, we talked about it yesterday, chlorophyll or coliforms, it's like so outside of the realm of what's been in my head is now I need to focus on what can cause an algae bloom or coliforms or
nutrients or microorganisms, things you guys don't normally worry about, right?
Totally. And all this stuff. And here I am like trying to read through it on emails to make a point as to why we can bump into this pond. So it's been an experience, a learning experience for sure, but it's also exciting,
So as far as water quality, Regina, what are some of the, when we discharge to a surface water body, what are some of the major concerns? Which contaminants or parameters or say the DEC or the town most concerned about?
So for this particular location, it would be nitrates, phosphorus, fecal coliform was on the list. I don't know if I'm I think that covers it.
I think you got it.
I think they're primarily concerned with the level of nitrogen.
Absolutely, it's a major nutrient,
right? And that's what leads to these algae blooms and affects the shellfish. And so the town has been doing it such a great job of making sure that the water quality in this particular body of water has been improving over the years. That they are concerned that if they're if we were to pump water in that's a higher concentration of nitrogen than what's in the pond, that could affect the pond's quality. So that's what they're primarily concerned about at this location. We do dewatering for remedial projects as well.
Oh yeah.
And so that's a whole nother list of parameters
that's
the DEC is going to be looking at.
Yes, and that stuff, when you're doing stuff like that, once you take it out of the ground, it's got to be real clean before it goes back in, as you well know.
Right, yeah.
Otherwise, we're just spreading contamination around, and that's absolutely something we do not want to do.
Exactly. So, I mean, in those cases, when we're doing those types of projects, we do have a whole, depending on what you're treating, if you're going to put in a groundwater treatment system, and generally the DEC will require some baseline samples or samples from the system before you discharge to make sure that they're
effluent samples,
meeting the discharge criteria.
And the rate at which you dewater that water to then be treated before it goes back to wherever you're putting it has to be a much lower rate than what we're doing here, where we're pumping.
Oftentimes they are,
right?
Much smaller. Yeah. It's tough,
right? I can imagine the amount of filtration that you would need for
there. It's not even like the filtration. This is actually like treatment processes. We've got to physically, chemically, maybe sometimes even biologically remove these contaminants, using air strippers or carbon filters, all different types of technology. Which then leads me to believe something we were touching on a little bit earlier, geology, the aquifer properties themselves. When we do a geotechnical investigation or before we go out and we decide to dewater, what do we look for? What's important to know up front before we design and install a dewatering system?
First is the groundwater elevation,
which
we've already talked about.
Yep.
And then you want to kind of figure out what kind of soil quality there is. So if it's sandy soil, you're going to get a higher pumping rate coming out of the ground than say if you have like a clay or a very silty material, it'll
Mhm.
slow down the flow rate. So all those things that's what you want to consider. Those are the two main things I think when it comes to figuring out what your flow rate is. It's the soil conditions and the groundwater. And then the soil conditions, if you're doing diffusion wells back into the ground or even a recharge basin, that's going to affect how fast you can put the water back in the ground as well.
100%.
Yep.
Been there the hard way.
Yeah. We definitely pray for sand.
It sure does. It
Yeah.
sure does. So if let's just say, somebody does want dewater and the situation isn't ideal geologically or hydrogeologically, what do you do? I mean, do you tell them, no, this isn't going to work? There's no place to put the water. I can't get it back into the ground. I mean, has there ever been a situation where we had to tell a client or an owner, it's not going to work out? You have to maybe raise your footprint or your building, or maybe you can't have that theater or that basement that you really desire.
We haven't encountered. We've gotten pretty creative about ways that we can deal with the water on site. So we haven't had to tell a client, no, you can't put your basement in, or no, you can't have your entertainment room in that building. And hopefully we can continue to find creative ways to deal with the water and taking it out of the ground, but especially putting it back in. So I haven't been in that situation yet. I hope I don't have to be in that situation.
Well, and if you are, that it's very much so on the front end.
Or exactly.
Oh boy.
And maybe you just have to add 8 inches to that foundation and you'll be okay.
Before they spend any money.
Right. How about a 60-inch TV instead of that 70-inch TV? We'll get you just right.
It's amazing how much 8 inches does make a difference as far as volume goes. I mean, think about 8 inches.
In terms of GPM, we have to pump. Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But when you're looking
People
at
don't
it
understand that either.
Yeah, a large area. I mean,
guys got a couple thousand square foot building footprint. And we got to dewater the whole site 8 inches. It's still a lot of water we got to move for quite a while.
I mean, to think about 600 gallons per minute is incredibly impressive. And we've done ones where we go right into the recharge basin where we're not restricted by what we can put into diffusion wells, that we're going to 1,500, 1,200 gallons per minute into that. So
those are some big systems.
Yeah, it's an impressive amount of water that's moving just from the ground. And it's a closed system, so you don't even see it coming in or coming out or going in.
Well, that's.
I mean, it really is amazing that you can operate a system like this and draw down the water, in almost like a bathtub that you're in.
Yep.
Opposite of a bathtub, I guess. And do your construction in there for, 5 months.
Yeah.
And then you turn it off and the water comes up and it's not even, the basement isn't affected. It's waterproof. That's it.
I mean, we're going against nature,
Oh, there's no doubt about it.
We are 100% working against nature. And I think anytime that you do that, there's always going to be challenges and unforeseen things after you get into it. And you can do as much downfield blocking as you want, but there's always going to need to be those decisions to be made on the fly and to understand.
Well, this is leading into my next question. It's environmental impacts. We've talked about some like water levels in a pond or underneath somebody's house. We talked about some of the water quality, but another one that I know we face sometimes with regards to water levels is, and we've had this on a couple of sites, and maybe you haven't been involved specifically, Kyle, but there may be a wetlands nearby, and somebody wants to start dewatering. And if we start to affect that wetlands, we've had the eastern tiger salamander issues. We've got to be very careful. They have a very specific breeding habitat zone. You can't dewater that. Regina, you care to comment on any other environmental impacts that we face while, that we have to mitigate while we do some sort of dewatering, even though it's temporary?
So the wetlands and the salamanders is one. Another one that I guess is we just recently did a Long Island well permit application for a project out east again, and they had some contamination issues, or
100%.
And we submitted our application to the DEC. We addressed I think all of their comments, what they were looking for, and for a Long Island well permit for some irrigation wells. And they came back and they denied the permit actually because their contamination at the site was a little, it was too much for them to tolerate. So that one has not been resolved yet, but.
And that was groundwater, excuse me, that was tested beforehand and then submitted with all of the modeling.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
everything.
So it was groundwater used for irrigation.
Okay.
And so.
Oh, I know the site well.
Yeah. So, and I apologize for cutting you off, but so then they see that and they're like, okay, you cannot pull this water out because it's contaminated. We'd want it to stay there.
Yes.
And if you do pull it out, then
I
there's
think
going to
the
be some
concern is
strict-
that they would be, since it was an irrigation system, they would be spreading whatever that contamination was across.
Yeah, they were
okay.
concerned about
Right. You said
affecting the
irrigation.
local
Yeah.
hydraulics. There's an ongoing investigation.
Yep.
It could have screwed things up. Another environmental impact, and this could affect sites that are close to the shore when we dewater, is saltwater intrusion.
Mm-hmm.
All right. What people don't understand is when we start pulling water out, say down by the bay or down by the ocean or maybe the Long Island Sound or something to get a foundation in, if we're right on the beach, even like on maybe the north side of the South Fork on the Peconic Bay or something, you can start to induce, salt water to migrate inland, and that can become a real concern too, especially if there's a local water supplier or people have irrigation wells or they're on their own private wells. Any issues you've had to overcome with that, Regina? That's okay. This is something I get involved quite a bit with the saltwater intrusion. And again, that's another, something that maybe we didn't consider at this site in East Hampton. It's sort of on a brackish pond and everything else.
And that water is brackish. Actually, the driller was out there yesterday, and I saw him have a little taste of it.
Oh, boy.
Is that salty?
One of the things we tell our folks never to do: don't drink the water or eat the dirt.
Yeah. Yep. That's what you get when you have an old school guy.
And I love that guy.
Yeah, he's great.
I hope he's listening.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, but saltwater intrusion can also be an issue that we've had to deal with, and again, not so much on a dewatering project, but it very well could be. And actually, we've had a couple of them in Sagaponack and a few places down by the beach where, say, the village engineer was really concerned if we start pulling a couple 100 gallons a minute out of the ground and moving things around, we may start to induce that saltwater flow inland. And again, irrigation wells, private wells, water supply, whole bunch of headaches that we had to demonstrate that was not going to happen. Not be the case. Again, we can't drink salty water, as some of us can't or shouldn't.
Those nice luscious lawns out there don't like be sprayed with salt water.
That's right.
There, I'm sure.
That's right. And we've also, as Regina pointed out, we've got golf course clients that are down by, say, the bays and the oceans and everything else. And we've got to be very careful when you start pumping water that you don't induce that, as you just pointed out.
Right.
Number one, it'll really screw up the golf course or the lawn. But number two, and more importantly, is this is our sole source of drinking water. We got to treat this like it's made of gold, like it's made of glass. We don't want to break it.
Right. Absolutely.
All right. So to start to wrap things up a little bit, any new technologies out there related to dewatering that we could look forward to into the future? You did a good job of describing how we do sheeting and coffer dams and the well points or deep wells and all that fun stuff. But what else? Is there anything on the horizon that may be a game changer, so to speak, make things easier for us?
I've worked with some contractors who come up with pretty creative ways to avoid having to get a Long Island well permit, but it's still able to dewater the site enough so that they can facilitate construction. With that said, though, if you're withdrawing more than 100,000 gallons per day, even without well points, you are going to need a water withdrawal permit. So, it's walking a fine line, I think, for some people trying to be creative. And
yeah, on our end, this project in particular, I think this is the fourth large-scale dewatering project that I've worked on. And this is by far the one that I've been most intimately involved in.
I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, Kyle.
Oh, it's definitely a great thing.
All right,
and
we're glad to have the opportunity to work with you on it, for sure.
And as challenging as it is, as I mentioned before, it is exciting, because there's a lot to learn that goes along with it. And we do, as I mentioned, like cofferdam dewatering, a lot of very small scale stuff for just, a week long construction, critical path stuff that we need to get done, whether it be boat ramp or bridge abutment, whatever it may be. And from learning what we're doing here, I can put in a lot of what we're doing here and make it more efficient on the smaller scale stuff, which has been great for me. I know it's not new technologies in the future per se on this end, but it's helped me a lot open my mind to what's possible and what can be more efficient on the smaller scale stuff. But it's also opened up my research into how other people do it, and maybe not particularly out here in the East End, but how they dewater for large private residences on, a river in Colorado.
Oh yeah.
And how they can utilize electric pumps instead of diesel pumps, which with the trend of everything in the world today,
electrification, like your car.
Exactly. Could definitely be something that we could be moving towards in the future, so try and pivot and go on that end, and then just see what's more efficient and more effective for us to not have to send out someone every day to change oil on a pump or monitor these wells by the in
sure
person.
They don't run out of diesel.
Totally. So it's opened my mind to do more research. I don't understand the trends so much right now just because we're in it. You know what I mean? We're like trying to focus on this one. But this will definitely allow me to open my mind up more and see what else is out there.
Cool.
Yeah. The next one.
I'd love to see stuff maybe like horizontal wells under a site, it's the directional drilling, something like that work, or, just fascinated if something like that has potential.
That would be a nice project to work on. I don't think we've had an opportunity to
No, I just
that.
Think of the applications, but who knows? You guys have any closing remarks you want to add before we wrap up for the day?
No, I mean, I think just to go over the top here, it's been a pleasure working with you guys. And I appreciate you having me on today.
We're glad you could join us. And it's been a pleasure to work with you and Chesterfield over the years. You guys are a top-notch professional firm, and you always do good work. You've never left us hanging. So
I appreciate
that. Means a lot. Again, I want to thank our guest, Regina Bykov, our Senior Project Manager at PWGC, and Kyle Allan, a Project Manager at Chesterfield Associates. Again, I'm Paul Boyce, the host of the Environmental Echo of PWGC. If there are any questions, or if our listeners or watchers, subscribers, want to reach out to us in any way, best way to get a hold of us is at our website, which is www.pwgrocer.com/podcast. And I just want to thank everyone today to listening to our dewatering show. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Paul.